the Brazil impeachment coup situation. Basically, Brazilian officials are not happy with how the coup is being portrayed outside of Brazil, and they're seeking to control the discourse through their diplomats abroad. They're in damage control mode, basically. Um, for those, I mean, we've talked about it all across the various shows before. The democratically elected president has been essentially ousted, and her interim replacements um, are way more corrupt than what she's alleged to be. And her very diverse, cabinet reflective of the country has been replaced by all white men. So it's a very interesting story that's unfolding. And from some of the other news stories that I've read about, it's not playing very well in South America. And it just seems like there's some suggestion that there is support from the U.S. government, while not blatant and specific. There's allegedly some behind-the-scenes support for this change that has taken place. So, next, go ahead.
I was going to say, let me get in on that. Imagine that we have a Democratic president, or we have the Democrats in power here in the United States, and something happens, and they impeach the president. Instead of putting in the next person or somebody from the same party to replace them as president, imagine that you put in somebody that's lost to that person, 4, 5, 6 times in a row in elections. Like, they can never win election, and yet somehow they became president. That is how serious what is going on in South America is right now. And if you're familiar with what's been going on in South America and its history with the United States after the Monroe Doctrine, it's not necessarily a conspiracy theory or like just completely fabricated that the United States is involved, just like they had a special involvement in the coup in Honduras. So I wouldn't at all be surprised that this is just right out of the CIA's handbook.
And that's an excellent point too, right? Like the fact that, like you said, this is someone who could not cut the snuff basically on his own. They had to orchestrate this coup, this impeachment process, to be able to get put in power when they weren't able to do so, through legitimate means. Brazil's democracy is approximately 35 years old, was formerly a military dictatorship. So, I mean, this is really, the fact that this is happening, Nick is exactly right. It really has multiple implications beyond just one allegedly corrupt leader.
The center right or right leaning parties take over. I don't understand how they plan on actually sustaining it when Brazil has, through the entire life of its democracy, the leftist party has maintained complete control democratically. The right-wing party has always been on the back foot because Brazil, just ideologically as a population, is not a right-leaning country. So I don't understand what the long-term goal of this coup is. Was it just opportunists that thought they could oust the president and make her unpopular? She may be personally unpopular, but the ideology of the party is not unpopular. It's the corruption that both parties are embroiled in. So I don't know when the next election cycle is for Brazil, but I don't understand how long-term they have any way of convincing the Brazilian people to vote for this right-leaning party, when what I've seen so far is that the only complaints people have had on the left-leaning party in Brazil is that it's not left-wing enough, and there has been protests about them being too centrist or not supporting the poor enough. And so I don't understand how how they could sustain this for very long.
Well, it's really not about sustainability. What they want to do is they want to quickly and easily get their people in and put in place a lot of policies, or set forth a lot of programs for like businesses to extract resources, or not have to obey environmental laws. They want to get as much of that stuff in place as possible in a short period of time. And once that stuff starts rolling, it's really hard to undo it. They can sign trade deals. They can fundamentally rewrite government. They can sell off the public lands. I mean, once it's sold, you can't get it back through the democratic process. Like, there's a lot of damage that you can do in the short term that it can't just be easily undone.
And just on that note, some of the things that they might be doing, like you mentioned, taking land or doing things like that. Just a reminder that the Olympics are supposed to be in Brazil in 70 days.
Yes, this summer. Yes.
70 days from now, they're dealing with what could be called a coup, and they're about to host the Olympic Games with all the other nations there. 70 days. Just over.
Well, there's already been so many other issues ahead of, not even including this, right? Like there have been issues with just clearing out people from basically their space to make way for the Olympics. There's been a rise of police crackdowns and actually killings of predominantly black youth in Brazil as well. So there is like a whole host of issues bubbling up, like you point out, a mere 2 months before this year's Olympics is set to take place, and it's kind of insane that this is happening, in the middle of that process as well. Like, how are they going to pull it all together? I don't know. Like, it's just, I don't know. I'm just like trying to walk through it in my head. Like, you're right. Like, they're going through this impeachment process. They're basically staging a coup. And I read something, and somebody, I don't know if you guys know any more about this. I read this maybe like a week or so ago about the military was on standby basically, like, because they were going to back up, the removal. And I'm just like, what does that mean? Does that mean that if the military doesn't like what's going on, they're going to step in?
Because is it the military just going to revert back to the pre-democracy state? Because that's the only way I could see is the right wing making a deal with the military, because it's the only way I could see this lasting long term. They'd immediately get ousted in the next election. So I don't really, because they've done nothing to make themselves more popular with the people, and they still have their own corruption allegations to deal with, and being partnered with the military who can just overturn whole laws and make those corruption dealings and the whole elections non-valid seems like, for them, where coups happened all the time only 30 years ago, maybe that's the option they see.
It's just like I said, they're going to basically, sell off the public lands, privatize. They're going to do things of that nature that are hard to untangle, in a short period of time. Even if they lose the election, they already did the damage. They did what they can to do. They're going to privatize the water, deregulate the telecom. Who knows what else they'll possibly do, that they can just do, and it won't matter if people come and vote them out, because once the lands are sold, you can't get them back.
And that they're doing it with as close to the world watching as Brazil's probably going to get.
Well, I really don't think that, amongst the elite that run the world, I really don't think that that's a big issue.
Yeah, but I think the rise in, protests and outrage that's been going on, I agree with that, but we'll see, because people aren't happy. And from what I've read, other South American leaders are not happy about this, and it puts Brazil in a tough position, which is the point of this article that Q pulled from me earlier, that they're really trying to spin this, away from the criticism as if it's a legitimate process that's going on, and documentation, the transcripts that came out a couple of days ago suggest otherwise, that this has actually been orchestrated to undermine the former president and her administration.
Yeah, because this tips the whole balance of the continent to the right, basically, from the entire. There's not really a strong right-wing sentiment in South America at all, and it's a kind of a historic reversal from the right-wing colonial era. Ever since then, they've switched very hard to the left and have stayed there. Maybe too far. Maybe they've had their problems with that. Venezuela being one of them, although it's mostly due to oil. But they've stayed. All of South America has a very leftist tradition. So to see this coup happen in its largest and most, both in terms of population and size and economic power, suddenly switch to the right like this is going to cause long-term problems.
I'm not sure. Here's why I'll say I'm not sure, though. South America, although under democracy they have a left-wing tradition, that's only because they come from a right-wing authoritarian tradition that was put in place before that, right? So these left-wing movements are more like a backlash against the authoritarian regimes that were to the right and so forth before. So it's really just more of the same, so to speak. It's not necessarily like a big twist. Like in South America in particular, you can go country by country. They've switched. They've had democracy, dictatorship, back and forth, for the last 120 years, just about. And
But yeah,
that's just the game.
That's Brazil. Like Brazil was a military dictatorship up until the early 80s or so. I remember when I went to Brazil, my house sister, I think she may have been born like at the tail end of the military dictatorship. So that's what I'm saying. Like the current democracy is about as old as I am, maybe a little younger. So it's still, I mean, it's still fragile. There's still change and stuff being made, and so this is, I mean, it's just something definitely to watch and pay more attention to.